This video is now in session, and today we're going to rank Republican and Democratic nominees for the 2022 U.S. Senate. So we are starting to have some kind of sense as to what kind of candidates we're going to see for the Senate races, particularly in the competitive ones. So in this video, I'm going to just compare them, and I'm going to compare if the Republican nominee at face value is better than the Democratic incumbent, or if if a Democratic challenger is better politically speaking than a Republican incumbent. So it's similar in some ways to like the prediction videos or the forecast videos. But the thing is, though, in this, I'm going to also rate how good the candidate is in general. So we're going to do mainly the competitive and kind of competitive states. The only exception to that will be Alaska, because there is a bitter dispute between Lisa Murkowski and as well as Trump. So these are all the Senate races. I have to remove Illinois. These are all the Senate races that we're going to look at today. And let's start from Alaska, because I just mentioned that state. So Lisa Murkowski is the incumbent senator from Alaska. She's part of the Republican Party. And the Trump nominee who is going against Lisa Murkowski is Kelly Tshibaka. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. I think it's Tshibaka. She was the former commissioner of the Alaska Department of Administration, and she has a much more conservative view than Lisa Murkowski. She has not received Donald Trump's endorsement yet, but she most likely will. She's already gotten several endorsements from federal officials from the Trump administration, as you can see here, Justin Clark and as well as Bill Stepien. So, in terms of which candidate is better, this one I'm not going to be talking about the Democratic candidate, because whoever wins out will most likely win the actual election. Actually, that's not completely true. If Kelly Tshibaka wins, it could create a competitive race for Alaska, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think Lisa Murkowski is going to win. In terms of Kelly Tshibaka, I don't think she's a good candidate to run against Lisa Murkowski, so I'm going to shade it lean, just because Alaska isn't like completely shutting out Trump like Trump kind of candidates, because they have voted for Trump in the past two presidential elections. It's just been by narrower margins than it has been in all other years, and that has been happening for several decades at this point. You can watch my video on why Alaska is slowly turning purple and competitive. So Kelly Tshibaka, not really a good candidate. The next one, Nevada. Nevada, we have Catherine Cortez Masto, who is the incumbent senator from Nevada. And then in terms of the Republican Party, we have Adam Laxalt. And then these are just the main names. Adam Laxalt seems like he has the best chance of winning the Republican primary. Dean Heller. Why is Dean Heller in here? Okay. Well, Dean Heller, I think, used to be from the U.S. Senate. So, like, he used to be a senator from Nevada. But Dean Heller, if he runs somehow again, he is not going to win the Senate race, because there's always that unspoken rule, which is that if you lost your Senate seat, and then you try to run the next time for that same Senate seat, you're not going to win that election. That's like an unspoken rule that applies to almost every single election. So I don't think Dean Heller is going to run. For Adam Laxalt, I think he's an okay candidate. I don't think he's the best candidate to flip the seat, and if he does win the Republican primary, I doubt he's going to flip this seat from Catherine Cortez Masto. But I'd say that he's okay. He's like the status quo for Republicans. I'm also gonna change the Kelly Tshibaka characterization, mainly because I believe she is a worse candidate than Adam Laxalt. For Arizona, we have Mark Kelly as the incumbent senator, and for this race, it is incredibly bad for Republicans. In terms of, there's only one person who's actually declared to run, but we're going to also look from the publicly expressed interest because they'll most likely also run. So here we have Andy Biggs, Mark Brnovich, and then Paul Gosar and Michael McGuire. So of all of these people, I think that Mark Brnovich is the best candidate to run, mainly because he is the most moderate out of all of these. But in terms of the candidate that I think would actually, the candidates that I think would actually win the Republican primary, it's probably Andy Biggs or Paul Gosar, just because the Republicans in Arizona have moved so much to the right. So, comparing these two candidates, they're pretty much the same people. They're incredibly conservative, and that's really bad for Arizona, because Arizona is it's a more moderate state, and it's becoming more democratic. So if you have a very conservative candidate, you are going to tip off a lot of those moderate Republicans, and thus I think that those kinds of candidates are not that good. Now let's go to Colorado. Colorado, there's also a Democratic incumbent, Michael Bennet. I think that any candidate that actually, I wouldn't actually rate Colorado as particularly competitive, so we're gonna skip that. Missouri. So Missouri is interesting because Missouri should be easy to win for Republicans. That said, Eric Greitens has declared himself as part of the Republican primary, and Eric Greitens was accused of blackmailing and as well as and I think as well as cheating on his wife. So as a result, it's not that good. Eric Greitens is positioning himself as the Trump-like candidate, and he certainly could win the Republican primary. Just look at this poll right here, where Eric Greitens wins against Eric Schmidt. Now, obviously, this is by Remington Research Group, so this is not quite a nonpartisan poll, but it still shows that he does have a very good chance of winning, and that is not good. And you can see, if we don't look at Remington, if we look at Fabrizio, which is also Republican, they also have Eric Greitens winning out. So it's not good for Republicans because Eric Greitens is not popular among Missouris as a whole. So as a result, I would also give this a tilt rating. And this is something that you'll see for pretty much most of the Senate races where Democrats have the incumbency. It's because Republicans are not fielding good candidates at all for the Senate races. They could easily win the Senate just by getting moderate Republicans, just by getting maybe even a little bit more right to the moderate in terms of a candidate. But the fact that they're getting incredibly conservative candidates and Trump-like candidates is not good at all. Especially when a lot of these candidates might have scandals. Now, let's move over to Chuck Grassley and Iowa. So, for the Democratic I'll actually first do the Republican primary because I do want to talk about Chuck Grassley a little bit. Chuck Grassley, if he runs again, he'd be an okay candidate. Like, he would be able to win his race, but it would be incredibly competitive because his age is very, very. He's how old is he? He is right now 87 years old, which means that he would be running close to 90 years old when the Senate election happens, and when he gets out of the Senate from his next term, he'd be 96 years old. So that is a very, very advanced age, and thus, if he runs, then a lot of people will probably be concerned about that. He comes from the Reagan era, one of the last people to come from that era in the Senate. So he'd be an okay candidate, but there would be better candidates for Republicans to run. They could just run like Jim Carlin, and they would probably be able to win just because Iowa has gotten more to the right. In terms of the Democratic side, we have Cindy Axne, and then the Teresa Greenfield is not going should not run again. In terms of the other candidates, they're okay. In fact, I'd say that just because they don't have any scandals or anything deteriorating behind them, they're pretty good. Cindy Axne would be a particularly good candidate. Also, Michael Franken would also be a good candidate because he is a retired U.S. Navy admiral, and that carries a lot of weight for the constituents. In pretty much every single state. So I'll say lean. I mean, not lean, likely. Now, moving on to Wisconsin. Wisconsin, we have Ron Johnson as the incumbent senator. And if Ron Johnson runs again, it's not going to be good for Republicans. I mean, if he also doesn't run again, then it's also not going to be good for Republicans. So for Democrats, they don't really have much to lose in terms of their candidates, because most of their candidates are not controversial and a lot of them are moderate. So Tom Nelson is most likely going to win, or Alex Lasry. Alex Lasry does have a lot of where did I go? A lot of endorsements, but I'd say that Tom Nelson will ultimately pull out ahead. And if we look at this poll here, it is a Democratic pollster, but there isn't really much other polling. We see that Tom Nelson does win by 4 percentage points, so he'd make the race pretty competitive. Thus, I would also give that a likely rating. Over to Ohio. Ohio, I'd say this is a good opportunity for Democrats. If they get Tim Ryan, they couldn't get Amy Acton, so they might just have to settle for Tim Ryan, and that would be a good candidate. That would be one of the best candidates they could have for Ohio, just because Tim Ryan does appeal to the Rust Belt workers. For Pennsylvania, this is the best for Democrats. Because they have really good candidates running. They do have a lot, but they do have really good candidates. John Fetterman is that good candidate. He'll most likely win out the Democratic primary, and he is incredibly popular among Pennsylvanians, and he would almost definitely win the Senate race. So I'd say that's a likely. Over to New Hampshire, this is where I would give Republicans some props, where if they're able to get Chris Sununu to run, that would be a formidable challenger to Maggie Hassan, who is currently the incumbent senator from New Hampshire, and thus I would give it a likely characterization. He is very popular among people in New Hampshire, and he is the New Hampshire governor as a Republican. Over to North Carolina, this is where, Republicans don't if Pat McCrory actually wins the Republican primary, this seat could actually flip for Democrats, mainly because he is not incredibly popular among his constituents, even though he was the governor of North Carolina. You also have Laura Trump, who could also run. That said, I don't really think she would be able to win the actual general election, just because there could be so many arguments against her with nepotism. In terms of the Democratic side, though, they are not the incumbent party in the seat, so we're going to talk about them. Most of these people, uncontroversial. So I'd say that they're not particularly good, but they're not particularly bad. That said, if Pat McCrory does actually win the Republican primary, I would give them a likely characterization. For Georgia, Raphael Warnock, good candidate, I'd say. Appeals to Black Americans as well as moderate voters. And finally, we have Florida. I could go for Georgia again. Actually, Georgia, I'm supposed to do Republican, aren't I? So for this one, I'd say that it's okay. I would give it as likely just because they're uncontroversial compared to other candidates. That said, if Kelly Loeffler does run again and does in fact win, then it would be really bad for Republicans. Over to Florida, for Democrats, they don't really have much to go for against Marco Rubio, but I'd put it as lean. And thus, these are the ratings for the Senate seats in terms of how good the opposition party candidates are. And that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. This video is now adjourned, and I'll see you in the next one.